The camel smelled before you heard it, and you heard it before you saw it. The smell came first, a dense, animal smell, warm and slightly sour, the smell of a creature that had been walking for 3 days through dust and had not noticed and did not care. Then the sound, the soft, irregular percussion of heavy feet on dry ground, a rhythm that was not quite a rhythm, always slightly off the beat you expected, and the creak of the wooden saddle frame, and the low, dissatisfied groan that camels produce as a kind of running commentary on the indignity of their situation. And then the animal itself, appearing around the rock or over the rise or through the heat shimmer of the desert afternoon, enormous and unhurried and completely indifferent to the effect of its arrival on the people waiting for it. Then the one behind it, and the one behind that. A caravan, when it arrived like weather. Welcome to Dull Tales. I'm glad you're here tonight, wherever you are, in bed already, lights already low, or somewhere quiet where the day is finally letting go of you. This is what we do here. We slow history all the way down, follow ordinary people through extraordinary worlds, and try to find what was real and human and sensory in the middle of it all. No timelines, no bullet points, no dramatic music. Just the story, told slowly, the way it was lived. Tonight we're going somewhere that most people have heard of, and almost no one has been. Not the Silk Road of the history books, not the abstract trade route drawn as a dotted line across a map, but the Silk Road as it actually was. A smell and a sound and a weight on your feet, and a horizon that never quite arrived. We're going to follow a caravan from the great oasis city of Samarkand westward toward the setting sun, through the mountains and the deserts and the long nights between the fires, and we're going to do it through the lives of the people who were actually there, the merchants and the drivers and the cooks and the guards and the animals and the road itself, which is a character too, perhaps the most important one. If that sounds like a good way to spend a night stay, get comfortable. This one takes a while, and that is exactly the point. And before we go, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. I always want to know. The geography of this channel is its own kind of map. Now let's go. The year is somewhere in the middle of the 14th century. The Mongol Empire, which in the previous century united the largest contiguous land empire in human history, has fragmented into successor states that maintain between them the essential infrastructure of the route, the caravanserais, the watering points, the relationships between local rulers and the merchants who paid across their territory. The Pax Mongolica, as later historians will call it, is fading at the edges but still present enough in the center to make the journey possible, the roads safer than they would be for the next several centuries after the Mongol system finally collapses entirely. It is, in other words, the best moment in the road's long history to make this journey. The caravan assembles in Samarkand over the course of 3 days. Samarkand is one of the great cities of the world in this century. It sits in the Zarafshan Valley of what is today Uzbekistan, an oasis city watered by 2 rivers in a landscape that is otherwise harsh and dry. And it has been a significant settlement since before Alexander the Great passed through it in 329 BC and declared it more beautiful than he had imagined, which is the kind of compliment that a city remembers for 2,000 years. By the 14th century, it has magnificent mosques and a thriving intellectual culture, and a market system that connects the trade of the entire Eurasian continent, the meeting point between the goods coming from China and India in the east, and the merchants coming from Persia and the Arab world and Europe in the west. The market smells of everything at once. Silk in rolls of vivid color, the deep red that comes from the mulberry-fed silkworms of Chinese workshops, the pale gold that is the specialty of certain Sogdian weavers, the blue-green that is made with a technique whose secret is so commercially valuable that it has been passed through families for generations without ever being written down. Spices in sacks and jars, pepper and cinnamon and cardamom, and the dark, resinous smell of musk that will travel all the way to perfumers in Paris and Constantinople, arriving months after it left this market, diminished in quantity but unchanged in quality. dried fruit and nuts from the orchards of the valley, which are among the best in the world, apricots dried to the sweetness of concentrated summer, pistachios still faintly green, almonds in their papery skins. And underneath all of it, the smell of animals. Horses and mules and the camels, the Bactrian camel, the tuhu. Imped variety that is native to Central Asia, and that is the essential technology of the overland Silk Road in the way that the sailing vessel is the technology of the maritime trade. The animal that makes the journey possible, that can carry 300 kilograms of cargo and go for days without water, and walk 30 or 40 kilometers a day across terrain that would destroy any other pack animal within a week. The merchant who is organizing this particular caravan is a man named Yusuf. He is 44 years old, born in Samarkand to a Persian family that has been in the merchant trade for 4 generations, a lineage that means he grew up with the vocabulary and the calculations and the relationships of this world as his native language. The exchange rates and the tariff schedules and the names of the caravan leaders and the names of the officials who could make your journey easy or impossible, and the names of the watering points on each route, and which ones were reliable, and which ones could not be trusted in a dry year. He is not a romantic about the road. This is perhaps the first thing to understand about the people who actually traveled the Silk Road, as opposed to the people who romanticize it from the distance of other centuries. The road is not romantic from the inside. The road is work. It is a business that happens to take place over enormous distances and dangerous terrain. And the distances and the terrain are not features that the merchants celebrate, but problems that they manage, day by day, with a combination of preparation and experience, and the specific kind of fatalism that develops in people who have spent enough time in the kind of country where the difference between arriving and not arriving comes down to whether you chose the right route or the wrong one. Yusuf has been making this journey, or versions of it, for 20 years. He is traveling this time with a cargo that is, for the Silk Road, relatively compact and enormously valuable. Silk, as always, several hundred rolls of high-quality Chinese silk in the vivid colors that the Western markets will pay the most for, and musk, which travels in small leather pouches and is worth its weight in almost anything, and 2 sealed wooden boxes that he does not discuss with anyone, and that he sleeps near every night of the journey, which is the Silk Road merchant's version of not discussing something. He has hired a caravan leader, a man called Timur, which is not his original name but the name he goes by on the road, a Turkic name meaning iron, to manage the practical operations. The animals, the drivers, the guards, the route decisions, the negotiations at the checkpoints. Timur is 50, tall and angular with a face the color of old leather and eyes that have spent decades looking at long distances. And he manages the caravan with the specific quiet authority of a man who knows exactly what he is doing and has no interest in performing authority because the authority is actual and requires no performance. The caravan has 37 camels, 8 mules, 4 horses, and 42 people. The 42 people include the merchants, Yusuf and 2 others, a young man from Tabriz named David who is making his first long journey and who is trying very hard not to show how frightened he is, and a compact, cheerful Chinese merchant named Chen who deals in lacquerware and medicines, and who has made this crossing 6 times, and regards it with the equanimity of someone who has decided that the journey will go as it goes and worrying about it is a waste of the attention that could be spent on more useful things. It includes the drivers, men who manage the camels, which is a skilled and specific occupation. The camel is not, as a general principle, an animal that cooperates with the human agenda. It has its own agenda, which involves a great deal of complaining, strategic sitting down at inconvenient moments, and a memory for perceived slights that is genuinely impressive. The men who drive camels for a living have developed, over years of working alongside these animals, a relationship that is not exactly affectionate but is deeply knowledgeable. They understand the individual personalities, the individual quirks, the specific sounds that mean this particular animal is about to do something awkward, and the sounds that mean it is simply commentating and can be ignored. It includes the guards, 8 of them, men who have been hired for their experience with the road, and with the specific kinds of danger that the road presents, which are various, and which Timur has assessed and weighted according to the current political situation in the territories they will pass through, and the season, and the route they have chosen, and the particular combination of factors that make this year's journey different from last year's in ways that only decades of experience allow you to see. And it includes, at the back of the caravan where the Kai Tichen operation is centered, a woman named Fatima. Fatima is 37 years old. She is the cook. This requires a brief explanation, because the presence of a woman in a caravan of this kind, not as a merchant's wife accompanying him, but as a working professional with a specific technical role, is perhaps surprising if you approach the Silk Road with certain assumptions about medieval gender and travel. The reality is more complicated than the assumptions. Women appear in the Silk Road record in multiple capacities. As merchants in their own right in some documented cases, as operators of caravanserais, as components of the various communities that the road passes through and that supply it with labor. Fatima is a cook because she is the best cook available in Samarkand who is willing to travel, and Yusuf, who has traveled enough to understand that the quality of the food at the end of a long day can mean the difference between a caravan whose people are functional and one whose people are eroding, hired her without particular comment on her gender. She has traveled before, not this far but portions of the route, with other caravans enough to know what the road requires. She knows that her kitchen is whatever flat surface can be found at the day's end, that her fire depends on fuel that must be carried or found along the route, that the ingredients she has are the ingredients she packed, and there will be no resupply until the next significant waypoint, and that 37 camels and 8 mules and 42 people will be hungry at the end of every day regardless of what the day has produced. She is very organized. She is also, in a way that the caravan will discover gradually over the weeks of travel, rather more than a cook. She is a reader of situations and people, a repository of route knowledge gathered from 2 decades of listening to travelers talk in the establishments where she has worked, a pragmatist of the first order who has opinions about everything and shares approximately half of them, the other half being retained for deployment at the specific moment they will be most useful. On the 3rd day of assembly, the caravan is ready. Timur walks the length of it at dawn, checking loads and lashings and the condition of animals he knows individually by now after 3 days of watching them. He finds 2 loads that need rebalancing. Asymmetrical loads cause problems over distance, gradually shifting and stressing the animal in ways that don't manifest immediately but accumulate over days. He makes the corrections himself in silence, with the efficiency of a man who has done this so many times that the assessment and the correction happen almost simultaneously. The sun is not yet above the horizon. Yusuf stands at the head of the caravan with a small cup of tea in his hands, the steam rising into the cold morning air of Samarkand, and he looks west. The road runs west from here, through the mountains, down to the plains, through the territories of various rulers who will take various amounts of money at various checkpoints, through the desert sections and the river crossings, and the mountain passes that close in winter, and the ones that close in spring, and the ones that are always passable but are never pleasant. He finishes the tea. He gives the signal. The caravan begins to move. The sound of it is the first thing. 42 people and 45 animals beginning to move simultaneously produce a sound that is less a collection of individual sounds than a single composite event. The padding of camel feet on dry ground, the creak of loaded saddle frames, the mule's occasional commentary, the voices of the drivers in several languages issuing the specific commands and encouragements that their animals respond to, the jingling of the brass bells that some of the lead camels wear, whose purpose is partly decorative and partly practical, the sound carrying ahead of the caravan to warn any oncoming traffic in the narrow places on the road where two caravans cannot pass each other without coordination. Davad, the young merchant from Tabriz, walks near the front of the column for the first hour, trying to take in the sound and the movement and the scale of the thing he has joined. He is 23 years old, and he is frightened in the specific way of someone who has committed to something large and is only now fully grasping the size of the commitment. He has been in the merchant trade since he was 15, apprenticed to his uncle, learning the mathematics and the relationships and the letter writing and the negotiation that constitute the business end of trade. He knows the theory of the road. He has heard the stories. The stories did not include how long the first day would feel. They have been walking for approximately 3 hours when he understands that the rest of the day will be more or less identical to the first 3 hours. The landscape changes, the cultiva. Ted orchards and fields around Samarkand give way to scrubber, drier country, the last of the irrigation channels falling behind them, the road becoming a dirt track through terrain that is brown and ancient and indifferent. The sky above is immense. The horizon is far. The caravan moves through this space with the deliberate, unhurried pace of an entity that has already accepted that the distance is what it is, and that rushing is not a strategy for dealing with it. He falls into the walking. This is the thing about the caravan journey that takes a day or two to learn, and that nobody who hasn't done it can fully anticipate. The walking is its own education. Your legs learn the pace, which is the pace of the loaded camel, which is somewhere between 3 and 4 kilometers per hour, steady, unvarying, a pace that a human being can maintain for 8 or 10 hours if the conditions are not extreme. Your body adjusts to this pace over the first days, the muscles finding the particular rhythm of it, the attention learning to distribute itself across the duration of the day rather than concentrating in spurts of effort. Your mind changes too. The vast empty landscape and the steady movement and the absence of the dense social and commercial stimulation of the city produce a shift in mental quality that travelers of the road describe in various ways, but that amounts to something like this. The mind slows down to match the pace of the walking, the ordinary noise of thought reducing into something quieter, more attentive, more present to what is actually there. The color of the light on the rocks, the specific call of a bird, the sound of the animals, the smell of the dust, the particular quality of tiredness that builds through the afternoon, and which is different from the tiredness of stationary work, cleaner, more complete. Davad does not feel this on the first day. He feels his feet. His feet are not broken into this kind of walking. The boots he bought in Samarkand at his uncle's recommendation are good boots, high-quality leather, well-made, exactly right for this purpose. And they are completely new and have not yet accommodated the specific shape of his foot. And by the middle of the afternoon, they are communicating this to him with some force. Fatima, when the caravan stops for the midday rest, 2 hours, the animals resting and the people resting, mandatory in the heat of the early part of the journey, notices David sitting against a rock with his boots off, and an expression on his face that combines pain with the particular dignity of a young man who does not want to appear to be suffering. She brings him something from her stores, a small pot of rendered fat mixed with a herb whose name she says in a language he doesn't recognize, and she says it without looking at him particularly, as if the giving is incidental, which is precisely the form that care takes among people on the road, who have learned that calling attention to vulnerability makes the vulnerable person's situation worse. He takes it. He applies it to his heels and his toes. When the caravan moves again, he is walking better, not perfectly but better, and Fatima, whose back is turned as she repacks her stores onto the kitchen mule, notes this with the particular satisfaction of someone whose intervention worked, which is all the acknowledgement she requires. The first night camp is in a hollow sheltered by rocks, a natural stopping point that Timur has used before and that the road has been using in some form for centuries. The accumulated fire rings and the worn patches in the earth bearing witness to the countless caravans that have stopped here on their first night out of Samarkand, making the same calculation about distance and shelter and water that Timur is making now. There is a well. The well is the difference between this place and the empty ground around it, a stone-rimmed opening in the earth, hand-dug at some point in a past that the stones themselves cannot date, maintained by some arrangement between the local people and the travelers who use it, a product of the Silk Road's ecosystem of mutual dependency that extends far beyond the merchants and the animals to include the communities along the route whose economy is built around the needs of people passing through. Timur checks the well first before anything else. He lowers the bucket, listens to the sound of it hitting the water. The depth of the splash tells him something about the level, pulls it up, looks at the water, smells it, tastes a few drops. Good. He signals to the drivers to begin watering the animals. The camels drink with the particular gravity of animals that know exactly how much they need and take exactly that amount, no more, with a precision that seems almost deliberate in its economy. The mules drink quickly and impatiently. The horses drink with their heads down for a long time, each one waiting its turn with a patience that the drivers have impressed upon them through training, and that holds mostly, though there is a moment when the gray mare that belongs to the chief guard bumps a younger horse that bumps a mule, and the mule's response is brief and emphatic, and ends with everyone at a slightly better distance from everyone else. Fatima has the fire going. She has had the fire going for 20 minutes by the time the animals are settled, using the dried fuel she packed specifically for the first nights when the landscape may not offer natural fuel, building it in the particular way she builds fires, efficient, not large, generating the heat she needs with the minimum waste of material, because material is limited and the road is long, and the calculation runs through everything she does. The smell of cooking begins. This smell, fire and fat, and the specific aromatics of the spice kit she carries, is one of the things that changes the character of the camp from a collection of tired people and animals in a hollow in the ground to something that feels, briefly, like a place. The smell of food cooking is one of the oldest signals of human habitation, a sensory announcement that a space has been made temporary home, that someone has decided this is somewhere worth feeding people, and the 42 people of the caravan respond to it with the unconscious relief of mammals who have been on their feet all day and are about to be fed. The meal is a stew lamb that was purchased in Samarkand for the first days of the journey when fresh meat is still possible, with dried onions and a handful of spices, and the flat bread that Fatima has made on the griddle itself being one of the heavier items in her kit, and one of the most important, because bread made on a griddle over a campfire is different from bread in 100 other ways, and better in the specific way that matters at the end of a long day, which is that it is warm and fresh and present. They eat in groups, the way the caravan naturally divides itself for meals. The merchants together, the drivers and guards in their own clusters, Timur slightly apart from everyone with his bowl and his thoughts about tomorrow's route. Fatima eats last, as she always eats last, not from deference but from the logic of the cook, who is always the last to sit because there is always something else to do before sitting. She sits eventually, near the fire and eats and looks at the sky. The sky above the hollow is extraordinary. There is no other word for it. This is one of the facts about the Silk Road that the history books mention, and that still manages to be surprising when you actually encounter it. The night sky in the desert interior of Central Asia, far from any settlement large enough to produce light that might compete with it, is one of the most extraordinary things that the human eye can experience. The stars are not scattered across the darkness the way they appear from any modern urban location. They are packed into it, layer behind layer, more stars than space. The Milky Way not a pale smudge but a structural element of the sky. A bright river of accumulated light that runs from one horizon to the other and divides the dome of the night into two halves. Fatima has been looking at this sky, on and off, for 20 years of caravan travel. She is not tired of it. She eats her stew and she looks at the sky, and she thinks about nothing in particular, which is itself one of the gifts of the road. The specific quality of mindlessness that comes when the body has done what it needed to do, and the immediate tasks are complete, and the next tasks are not yet here. The gap between effort and effort in which the mind can be nothing, can simply be receiving without processing. In the firelight nearby, David is talking to Chen. Chen is teaching him a dice game that he says he learned in a port city on the South China Sea, from a sailor who said he learned it from a Japanese trader who said he learned it from someone else. The game having traveled its own route across the continent, and arrived in this camp in the same way that everything travels the Silk Road eventually, carried by the movement of people, and accumulated through the layers of contact and exchange that the road enables. The dice are small and old, and made from what appears to be bone. David loses 3 times in a row and Chen accepts his small coins with the equanimity of someone who expected this outcome, and is not particularly pleased by it, because the point was not the winning but the teaching, and the teaching has been accomplished. Timur finishes his food. He stands, walks the perimeter of the camp, checks the animals, checks the guards who are on the first watch, looks at the sky with the specific attention of someone reading weather rather than experiencing beauty, and goes to his sleeping place. He is asleep in approximately 4 minutes. The fire burns down. The stars wheel overhead. The first day of the journey is over. Now, let me take you deeper into the road. Let me skip past the days that are like the first day, the walking, the stopping, the watering, the cooking, the sleeping, the walking again. Not because those days are unimportant, but because their importance is cumulative rather than eventful. The significance of them lying in the repetition rather than in any single instance of it. And the repetition is best conveyed not by describing it over and over, but by letting you feel the shape of it in the structure of the telling. The way the road imposes its rhythm on the travelers, and the rhythm imposes itself on you. So days have passed, many days. The caravan has left the last populated regions of the Fergana Valley behind and climbed into the mountains of the Pamirs, which the people of Central Asia call the roof of the world, and the name is not metaphorical. The Pamir Plateau sits at an average elevation of 4,000 meters, and the passes that cross it climb higher than that, into an air that is thin and cold even in summer, and that at this time of year, in early autumn, has an edge to it like a knife that has been left in a cold place. The mountains change everything. The pace slows, not from fatigue, though there is plenty of that, but from the terrain, which is no longer the flat, manageable ground of the valley, and has become a series of ascents and descents that require the careful placement of every hoof and every foot, the concentration of movement rather than the meditation of it. The camels negotiate the rocky paths with a surprising delicacy for animals of their size, placing their broad feet with a precision that is oddly graceful given everything else about them. The air is different. Everyone feels this. The thinness of it is not dramatic. It doesn't hit you like a wall, but it accumulates over the hours of climbing until you are aware that each breath is doing less than a breath at lower elevation, that the effort of the walking is costing you more than it was, that your head feels slightly strange in a way that you can't precisely articulate, and that Fatima, who has crossed these mountains twice before, recognizes as altitude and manages with the specific adjustment to the cooking that altitude requires. The water boils at a lower temperature up here, which means the beans she would cook in 2 hours at lower elevation need 3, and she has accounted for this. They stop at a caravanserai. A caravanserai, the word is Persian, from Caravan, and Sarah, palace or enclosed place, and the combination is characteristic of the Silk Road's tendency to name the practical with the aspirational. Is one of the rest houses that the rulers and merchants of the route have constructed at intervals along the road, spaced approximately 1 day's journey apart, to provide shelter for travelers and their animals. This one, high in the Pamirs, is a large stone structure built low against the mountain to resist the wind, with a central courtyard where the animals can be enclosed, and a series of rooms around the perimeter where the travelers sleep. The rooms are not comfortable by any standard except that of having 4 walls and a roof, which at 4,000 meters elevation in early autumn is comfort enough. There is a hearth in the largest room. There is fuel dried dung primarily, which burns with a smell and a heat that are both distinctive and functional. The caravanserai keeper is an old man named Rustem. He has been keeping this caravanserai for 30 years, which means he has seen the road in its various states of more and less safety, more and less traffic, the ebbs and flows of the political situation that affect the number of merchants willing to make the crossing. He knows the routes as well as anyone alive, knows the passes and which ones to avoid in which conditions and why, knows the water sources and the distances, and the particular problems that each season brings to each section of the road. He is also, by now, a repository of news from both directions. This is one of the functions of the caravanserai that doesn't appear in the commercial accounts: the exchange of information. The Silk Road is not just a route for goods. It is a route for news, for ideas, for the movement of religious and intellectual and artistic content that travels with the merchants and the pilgrims and the diplomats who use the same roads for their different purposes. A caravanserai keeper who has been in place for 30 years has heard, over those 30 years, an enormous amount of what is moving in both directions along the road, and the information he carries is in some respects more valuable than the silk and the spices. Rustem talks to Yusuf. He tells him about conditions ahead, a pass that is rumored to have been difficult this month, though his information is 2 weeks old. He tells him about a group of merchants who came through from the west 3 days ago with news from Tabriz. The political situation there is complicated in ways that will affect the tariffs at the checkpoint outside the city. He tells him about a Venetian who came through 6 weeks ago, the first European Yusuf will have heard of on this section of the route in 2 years, a sign either that the western end of the road is improving, or that this particular Venetian is unusually brave or unusually uninformed. Yusuf listens, he absorbs. He will not be able to verify most of this information. The Silk Road runs on information that is always partial, always delayed, always filtered through the interests and the reliability of the person reporting it. Rustem is a generally reliable source, but his information is 2 weeks old, and 2 weeks on this road is a significant margin of change. Yusuf weighs it against everything else he knows and files it in the part of his mind that carries the accumulating picture of the journey ahead. He pays Rustem for the night and for the animal fodder and for the meal that Rustem's wife and daughter-in-law have prepared: a flat bread with a stew of dried mutton and a handful of dried apricots that Yusuf eats with genuine pleasure, because the altitude and the walking have produced a hunger that makes everything taste better than it would at sea level and at rest. That night in the caravanserai, he and Chen sit together by the fire. Chen is, it turns out, more interesting than he presents himself as. This is one of the things the road reveals over time: the deepening of people, the way that the sustained proximity of the journey strips away the surface presentation that social life encourages and reveals the actual person underneath. Chen has been presenting, for the first weeks, as a cheerful pragmatist with no strong opinions and no particular story. This presentation is accurate as far as it goes, which is not very far. What Chen actually has is a lifetime of observation accumulated over 6 crossings of the road, a library of experience that he carries in his memory, and a quality of mind that has spent those crossings thinking about what the road means, not commercially, not geographically, but philosophically. in the specific way that a man who has spent his life moving between cultures develops a philosophy of what culture is and what it does, and what happens when you encounter a world organized on principles different from the one you grew up in. He tells Yusuf about the first crossing he made. He was 22, he says. He went with his father's caravan, not as a merchant but as an assistant, carrying bags and translating and learning. He had studied languages since he was a child. His father believed in languages as the essential technology of the road, more important than any cargo. And by 22, he had Persian and a workable Turkish, and a smattering of Arabic and the beginnings of the Venetian dialect that he would eventually develop into something more functional on subsequent journeys. On that first crossing, he says, he encountered something that he didn't understand until many years later. He was at a caravanserai, he says, somewhere in Khorasan. He is vague about the location, as travelers on the road are vague about locations, because the road has a way of making specific geography feel less important than the general experience. And there was a merchant from Baghdad sitting across from him, and the merchant had a book. Not unusual, merchants on the road frequently carried books, which were both a practical resource and a way of filling the long evening hours. But the book this merchant was reading was a copy of a Greek philosophical text, translated into Arabic, which had been translated from an earlier Arabic translation of an even earlier Syriac translation of the original Greek, each translation carrying the ideas forward with some loss and some addition, each translator leaving traces of their own thought in the spaces between the original sentences. The merchant was reading this book with complete absorption, occasionally making notes in the margin in a fine Arabic script, occasionally reading a passage aloud to himself in the low voice of someone testing the sound of words against the meaning of them. Chen watched him for a long time. He says, "I understood then that the road was not about silk." He pauses, the fire pops, somewhere outside in the courtyard a camel groans at something. He says, "The silk is the reason for the road, but the road is not the silk. The road is the conversation that the silk enables. The conversation between the merchant from Baghdad who is reading Greek philosophy in Arabic and the young Chinese merchant who is watching him. The conversation is the thing. The goods are just the pretext." Yusuf looks at him. He says, "I have been making this journey for 20 years, and this is the first time anyone has put it that way." Chen shrugs, in the way that people shrug when they V said something they believe, but are not particularly attached to having said. He says, "It becomes clear when you've done it enough times." The fire burns down. They go to their sleeping places. Outside, the mountain dark is absolute and cold and full of stars that the altitude has brought closer. The sky here at 4,000 meters more immediate than the sky at sea level. The distance between the eye and the stars reduced in a way that is probably optical illusion and feels like truth. In the morning, the caravan moves again. The descent from the Pamirs takes 4 days. 4 days of walking downhill, which sounds easier than walking uphill and is, in the specific muscular sense, a different kind of effort, the braking rather than the driving, the thighs doing the work of controlled descent rather than the propulsion of ascent. The terrain opens out as they drop in elevation, the narrow mountain valleys widening into broader ones, the vegetation changing from the sparse, wind-resistant plants of the high plateau to the denser scrub of lower elevation, and then, gradually, to something that approximates green. Water appears. This is not a metaphor. Water on the Silk Road is not the background condition of existence the way it is in the wet climates of northern Europe or coastal China. Water is the road. The route follows water, the rivers that drain the mountains, the underground channels called qanats that the Persian and Central Asian civilizations built to bring water from the mountains to the plains, the wells and the springs and the oasis towns that exist because there is water there, and not anywhere else for 100 kilometers in any direction. To travel the Silk Road is to move from water source to water source, and the distance between sources is one of the primary constraints on everything. How fast you can travel, how many animals you can bring, how long the journey takes, whether you survive. Timur manages the water with the precision of a man who has been managing it for 30 years and who has, like all experienced road travelers, a mental map of every source on every route he has used, updated by each journey and by the information exchanged at every caravanserai. Because water sources change, a spring dries up, a well collapses, a new well is dug, and the map must be current or its authority is dangerous. On the third day of the descent, they pass through a section of the route where the water source that Timur expects to use, a small spring in a side valley, reliable in his experience, marked in the mental map as a secondary stop, is gone. Not dry. The spring channel is there, the stone rim of the collection basin is there, but the water is absent, replaced by a damp mud that tells Timur the spring has diminished to the point where it is no longer usable for a caravan of this size. He makes the calculation instantly, without visible stress, because visible stress in the person responsible for the caravan's decisions is a luxury that cannot be afforded. He tells the drivers to increase the pace slightly, not enough to cause problems with the animals or the less fit members of the human party, but enough to reach the next reliable source, which is a river crossing that he now needs to reach before the end of the day rather than in the early evening as planned. He does not announce this change. He simply adjusts the pace and adjusts the timing of the midday rest, shortening it by half an hour, and the caravan, which is a system that has been running for weeks and has learned to read Timur's signals, adjusts accordingly. Davad notices the missing spring. He has been learning to read the road over the weeks of the journey, which is something that happens whether you intend it to or not. The road teaches through repetition, and through the accumulating experience of paying attention to what the experienced travelers around you pay attention to. He has been watching Timur, specifically, learning the particular kind of attention that route management requires, and he saw Timur look at the empty spring and saw the calculation happen and saw the pace adjustment that followed. He asks Fatima, in the evening when the caravan has reached the river and the crisis of the day is resolved, what would happen if Timur made the wrong calculation. Fatima is gutting a fish that was bought from a man at the river crossing, a local who makes a living from the traffic, selling fish and flat bread and information about the road ahead in approximately equal proportions. She does not look up from the fish. She says, it depends what wrong calculation. He says, if we ran out of water. She says, in the mountains it is 3 days before the people start dying, the animals less, the horses first. He is quiet for a moment. He says, and how often does it happen? She says, when someone makes a wrong calculation. She puts the fish on the fire. She does not elaborate because the elaboration is in what she has already said, and she is not a person who explains her statements when the statements contain what needs to be said. He sits with this for a while. Later that night, he writes in the small journal he has been keeping since Samarkand, a personal record of the journey that is partly commercial, notes on prices and trading conditions, and the names of useful contacts at each waypoint, and partly something else, something he didn't plan to write, and that keeps inserting itself between the commercial entries. He writes, today I understood something about the road that the accounting does not contain. The accounting records what we carry and what we pay and what we expect to receive. The road is not the accounting. The road is the distance between water sources and the quality of the man who knows where they are. He thinks about this. He writes, I think I have been preparing for the wrong things. He closes the journal. In the firelight nearby, Yusuf is talking with a man they met at the river, a trader from somewhere he didn't specify, moving in the opposite direction, eastbound, who has news from the western end of the route that Yusuf listens to with the same focused attention he brings to all information on the road, processing it for its commercial implications, its safety implications, its implications for the decisions he will make in the weeks ahead. The news is mixed. Tabriz is open for business, but the tariffs have changed. Constantinople is accessible, but there are complications at certain checkpoints that suggest the political situation there is less stable than it was last year. There is a report of a new route being used by some merchants, bypassing a section that has become problematic, adding 3 days to the journey, but removing a specific danger that has cost 2 caravans their cargo this year. Yusuf listens. He asks precise questions. He thanks the man with the specific warmth of the Silk Road, where information freely shared is one of the currencies of the road, and the gratitude for it is genuine rather than merely polite. The man moves on. His caravan, smaller than Yusuf's, disappears into the evening dark in the direction of Samarkand. Yusuf sits by the fire and thinks about Tabriz. He has been to Tabriz many times. He knows the city, knows the market, knows the people he needs to know there, the merchant families who will buy his silk and his musk, the officials who can make the customs process smooth or difficult, the caravanserai keepers who are honest and the ones who are not. He has a mental picture of Tabriz built from many visits, layered over years, and the information from the eastbound trader will need to be integrated into that picture with the appropriate uncertainty about its currency and accuracy. He is good at this kind of thinking. 20 years of making this journey have built in him a particular kind of intelligence, not the intelligence of the scholar or the philosopher, but the intelligence of the man who must make decisions with incomplete information under conditions of genuine consequence, where wrong decisions have costs that are not abstract. His mind is calibrated for this. It finds the most probable interpretation of available evidence and acts on it while maintaining a peripheral awareness of the less probable interpretations, just in case. He is thinking about Tabriz and the changed tariffs when Fatima brings him a bowl of the fish stew. He takes it. He says, without particular reason, without planning to, "How many crossings have you done?" She says portions of the route 8, full crossing twice. This will be the 3rd. He says, "And do you find it different each time?" She considers this in the way she considers things, actually, rather than reflexively, taking the question seriously before answering it. She says the road is the same, the person on it is different. He nods. She goes back to the fire. He eats the stew, which is very good, as the food always is at the end of a long day on the road, and he looks at the river that they are camped beside, which is moving in the dark with the sound of water over stones, continuous and indifferent, carrying its load of mountain melt toward whatever sea it is eventually aimed at. The sound of running water at night, in the middle of a journey, is one of the sounds of the road that travelers remember for a long time afterward, sometimes for the rest of their lives. It is the sound of something that doesn't stop. It is the sound that tells you, lying in the dark at the end of a long day with your body carrying the accumulated distance of weeks, that the world around you has its own continuous movement that does not require your participation, that continues whether you are walking or resting, that is doing what it does without reference to your schedule or your fatigue or the decisions you made today. There is a comfort in this that has nothing to do with ease. Let me take you further west. Let me skip ahead again, through more days of walking, through the high desert of Khorasan, through the river crossing at the Amu Darya that takes the better part of a day, and requires the dismantling and reconstruction of certain loads to keep them above the waterline, through a sandstorm that pins the caravan in a hollow for 2 days, while the wind performs its absolute work on the landscape around them. The sandstorm deserves a moment. It arrives with very little warning, a change in the quality of the light, a brownish haze on the southern horizon that Timur sees, and immediately begins preparing for, issuing directions that produce an organized collapse of the caravan into a defensive configuration, without any of the travelers who have not experienced this before fully understanding what is happening or why. Then the storm arrives, and the why becomes clear. The wind is the primary thing. It is not a strong wind by the standards of something like a hurricane. It doesn't tear structures or knock people over. But it is a constant, heavy, relentless wind that carries the sand of the desert with it in a horizontal river of particles that gets into everything. Into the eyes despite the cloth tied over the face. Into the teeth despite the mouth closed. Into the loaded goods despite the careful coverings. Into the spaces of the body that the body didn't know it had until the sand found them. The animals respond to it with the specific resignation of animals that have encountered this before. The camels fold to the ground and tuck their faces into the lee of their own bodies, using their anatomy as shelter in a way that seems almost designed for this purpose, which in some evolutionary sense it is. The horses are more distressed. They have not made this journey as many times as the camels, and they don't have the physiological adaptations. And the drivers stay close to them, hands on their necks, talking them through it in the low, constant voice of a person whose job is to be the thing the horse focuses on when everything else is terrible. Fatima, who has been through sandstorms before, uses the time to repair equipment. Specifically, she spends the 2 days of the storm repairing the leather straps on the kitchen kit that have been showing wear for the past week, and that she has been meaning to address when a convenient moment arose. A sandstorm is not what most people would call a convenient moment, but Fatima's definition of convenience is organized around the availability of time rather than the comfort of the context, and the sandstorm has produced time. She sits with her back against the primary load camel, who is the most solid windbreak available, with the straps in her lap and her repair kit and the fine needles that she uses for leather work. And she works by feel because the light is terrible, and the visibility is essentially zero beyond 3 meters. David crawls into the same windbreak to escape the worst of the wind and finds her there, and is slightly embarrassed by his own evident distress relative to her evident composure. She hands him one end of a strap to hold steady. They work together in the brownish dark of the sandstorm, her hands guiding his into the correct positions for the work, neither of them speaking much because the wind makes speech effortful and the work speaks for itself. And after an hour the strap is repaired and she has assessed and initiated the repair of 2 more, and the storm is still going, but the immediate space they occupy is manageable, and the work is being done. He says during a brief lull in the worst of the wind, "Do you like this?" She looks at him. He says, "The road, the traveling, do you prefer it to being in one place?" She thinks about this for a moment, genuinely. She says, "I don't know anymore. I have been doing it long enough that the question doesn't quite make sense to me. The road is what I know. A stationary life would feel like something was missing, but that might just mean I have been on the road too long." He says, "Do you have family?" She says, "A sister in Samarkand, 2 nephews. I see them when I pass through." He says, "Doesn't it bother you to pass through?" She looks at the strap in her hands, turning it over to check the other side. She says, "It would bother me more to stay." She says this with the finality of a person who has examined the question and reached a conclusion that they are not still arguing with. And David, who is 23 and still arguing with most of his conclusions, recognizes this quality and is quiet. The storm passes on the morning of the 2nd day. The landscape it leaves behind is subtly rearranged, drifts of sand against the rocks, the track of the road filled and smoothed, certain features slightly altered. Timur walks ahead of the caravan when they move again, reading the reshaped terrain for the route, finding it partly by memory and partly by the landmarks that the sand cannot completely bury, rock formations, the distant profile of hills, the occasional carved stone that marks the road in sections maintained by the local authorities. They move west. The days accumulate. There is a rhythm to the journey that takes weeks to fully internalize, and that, once internalized, produces a particular relationship with time that most of the travelers in the caravan have not experienced before and will not fully understand until they return to a stationary life and find that time feels different, faster, and less present than it did on the road. On the road, time moves at the pace of the walking, which is the pace of the loaded camel, which is 3 to 4 kilometers per hour. This pace is slow enough that the present moment is fully visible, the ground underfoot, the sound of the animals, the quality of the light, the smell of the country they are passing through. The past is the distance behind them. They can sometimes literally see it, looking back at the landscape they walked through this morning. The future is the distance ahead, visible to the horizon, unknown beyond it. In a city, time is dense with simultaneity, the press of many events happening at once, the layering of past and future over the present until the present is almost invisible. On the road, time is linear and present and very clear. David writes about this in his journal. He writes, "I have been here for 7 weeks and I understand why the merchants who have done this many times have a quality that the merchants at home don't have. It is not patience exactly. It is something more like presentness, the ability to be entirely where you are. I have been learning it from the road, but I don't know yet if it will survive the return to Tabriz. I suspect it doesn't fully. I suspect it remains as a memory of having been present, which is perhaps enough." He reads this back. He crosses out the last sentence. He writes, "I don't know if it's enough. I think I want more than a memory of it." He puts the journal away. Ahead of him, the road runs west through the afternoon light, red gold and long, toward the distant smudge on the horizon that Timur has told him is the first sign of the region around Merv, one of the great oasis cities of Central Asia, a place of gardens and water in the middle of the desert, where the caravan will stop for 2 days to rest the animals and resupply and exchange information with the caravans moving in both directions. He walks toward it, one step after another, as all walking is done, the distance reducing at the rate of 3 or 4 kilometers per hour, the sun moving across the sky at its own rate, the two movements, his and the sun's, creating between them the measurement of the afternoon. Merv arrives eventually, as places always arrive eventually when you are walking toward them with patience. The city is visible from the road as a green density against the brown of the surrounding land, the gardens and orchards and the irrigation channels that make this place possible in a landscape that would otherwise support almost nothing. The smell reaches you before the buildings do, water and growing things and the specific productive smell of a city, which is the smell of cooking fires and animals, and the workshops that process the goods that move through this node of the road. The caravan enters through the western gate. Inside the walls, Merv is dense and busy in the way of all Silk Road cities, a permanent population supplemented by the constant movement of travelers and traders passing through, the city existing in a state of perpetual arrival and departure that gives it a quality of transience despite its antiquity. The market near the central mosque is full of merchants from every direction, the goods from China and India arriving from the east, the goods from Persia and the Arab world and beyond coming from the west, meeting here and being exchanged or transported onward in a continuous churn of commerce that has been happening in this city for centuries. Yusuf moves through it with the practiced ease of a man who has been here before and knows where he needs to go. He has contacts here. Of course he has contacts here. The merchant network of the Silk Road is built on contacts, on the relationships of trust and mutual benefit that accumulate over years and that are the actual infrastructure of the trade, more important than the roads or the caravanserais or the camels. He has a man in Merv he has dealt with for 15 years, a paper merchant, paper being one of the technologies moving westward along the road from China, where it was invented, to the Islamic world where its use is spreading, to Europe where it will eventually supplant parchment and change the economics of knowledge, And this man will have information about the road ahead and will want information about the road behind. And the exchange of information between them will be as valuable as any cargo. He finds the man's workshop. They drink tea. They talk for 2 hours. Afterward, Yusuf goes to the caravanserai where the caravan is staying and sits in the courtyard and processes what he has learned, which is considerable, and which changes certain aspects of his plan for the western leg of the journey. The information is both better and worse than he hoped. Better, the route through Persia to Tabriz is open and reasonably safe. The political situation in the territory around Tabriz, while complicated, is not more complicated than it was when he left, and the changed tariffs he heard about at the river crossing are real but manageable. Worse, there are reports, unverified, second or third hand, but persistent enough to carry weight, of a sickness moving westward along the same route they are traveling. The paper merchant has heard about it from 2 different sources, which is the threshold he uses for treating a rumor as potentially real. It is a sickness with swellings. It kills quickly. It has been in the Crimean trading ports for months and is moving west. Yusuf has heard versions of this rumor before. The road is always full of rumors of sickness. The conditions of travel, the density of people from different disease environments encountering each other, make illness a constant feature of the road experience, and reports of serious illness circulate with an amplification that doesn't always reflect the actual severity. He has dismissed many such rumors. He does not entirely dismiss this one. He carries it forward with him, this piece of information, into the western leg of the journey. He will not know on this journey that the sickness in the Crimean ports is the beginning of something that will kill a third of Europe. He does not know that the ships that carry it west from Kaffa will dock at Messina in the autumn and chain the world. He is a merchant on the Silk Road with a cargo to deliver and a schedule to meet, and a piece of information that he is not sure what to do with. He drinks his tea. He thinks about the road ahead. He makes his plan. Let me take you to an evening in Merv, away from the merchants and the commerce and the calculations of the route, to a scene that happens in every caravanserai on the Silk Road, every night in some form, and that is perhaps the most accurate image of what the road actually was and what it actually meant. It is the evening of the second day in Merv. The caravan is resting. The animals are fed and watered and resting in the courtyard. The food has been eaten, a proper meal, Fatima's best work of the journey so far, ingredients bought fresh in the Merv market, a lamb roasted over a fire built for the purpose, flat breads and a rice dish cooked with dried fruits and the saffron that she bought specifically for this stop, because she knew what ingredients would be available here and planned the meal accordingly. Around the fire in the main hall of the caravanserai are the members of the caravan, and also several travelers from other caravans, a group of Armenians heading east on a trading mission, 2 Persian pilgrims making the Hajj in the opposite direction, a young Mongol official traveling with a small escort on what he has described as administrative business. And the conversation that develops in the after-dinner fire time is the conversation that happens when the road brings this collection of people together, and the food and the warmth and the freedom from walking produce a sociability that the road's hardships otherwise don't allow. The conversation moves between languages. This is ordinary on the Silk Road, which is linguistically the most complex environment in the medieval world. The common languages of trade, Persian, Turkish, Arabic in certain sections, serve as the bridges between the travelers' native tongues, with Chen serving as a de facto translator for the Chinese sections, and David's growing linguistic competence getting its first real workout as he navigates between Persian and a Turkish-inflected Mongolian that the official from the Mongolian escort speaks, and that David has just enough of to manage barely, with a lot of filling in of gaps by both parties. The topics move the way conversation topics move in mixed company, from the practical, the road, the weather, the conditions at certain waypoints, to the commercial prices, available goods, market conditions, To the personal, where are you from? How long have you been traveling? What are you carrying? To the philosophical, what is your religion? What do your people believe about death and judgment? Is the world eternal or created? What did your teacher say about this? The last category of question is, perhaps surprisingly, the most common. The Silk Road, for all its commercial purpose, is one of the great intellectual highways of the world, and the exchange of ideas is as characteristic of it as the exchange of goods. The Islamic merchants Br. In the philosophical tradition of the Islamic world, which in this century is the most sophisticated in existence, carrying within it the preserved and elaborated Greek philosophical corpus, alongside original contributions that will not reach Europe for another century. The Buddhist pilgrims bring the Dharma. The Christian merchants from Armenia bring their particular version of the tradition. Chen brings a Confucian-inflected pragmatism that is entirely comfortable with multiple frameworks coexisting without resolution. The Mongolian official brings a syncretic religious sensibility that the Mongol Empire has developed through a century of ruling a territory that contains everything. They do not agree. The evening's conversation does not produce theological consensus, which would be miraculous, but it produces something else. The experience of having heard how the world looks from inside a different framework, not as an abstraction but as a living, present, specific account offered by a specific person who has spent their life inside it. The experience of sitting across from someone who organizes reality differently than you do, and finding that the difference is interesting rather than threatening. This is what the road does. Not always, not reliably, not without the accompanying commerce and conflict and exploitation that also characterize it. But in the caravanserai evenings, in the fire time when the day's work is done, and the travelers from different worlds are temporarily occupying the same space, something happens that is harder to quantify than a commercial transaction, and that travels further. David writes about this in his journal. He writes, "Tonight I understood what Chen meant when he said the conversation is the thing. I talked for 2 hours with a Buddhist monk from somewhere east of here, whose name I cannot spell and whose language I don't have, and we had almost no common words, and we managed to discuss, I think, what happens to consciousness after death, and neither of us was able to fully communicate what we believe or fully understand what the other believes, and when he left I felt that I had been somewhere. Not somewhere geographic, somewhere that has no name in the accounting of the road." He puts the journal away. He looks at the fire for a while. He goes to sleep. In the courtyard of the caravanserai, the animals breathe in the dark. The camels have settled into the particular motionless quality that camels achieve when they are genuinely at rest, which is different from their rest-in-transit quality in a way that the drivers recognize by sight. The horses stand close together for warmth. The mules are asleep in the least glamorous way possible, which is their consistent approach to everything. Above the courtyard, the sky is full of stars. The same stars that are over Agnes's English village, over Giovanni's Florence, over Brother Anselm's monastery in Avignon. The same stars that will be, in a few months, over a harbor in Messina when 12 ships dock and change the world. The same stars that are, tonight, over the oasis city of Merv, shining down on 42 travelers and their animals and the conversation that just happened and the journey that continues tomorrow. The stars do not know about the conversation. They do not know about the road. They are simply there, as they have been there for longer than any road or conversation, as they will be there long after both. But the conversation happened under them. The road runs under them. The people sleep under them in the courtyard of the caravanserai, their various frameworks for reality temporarily suspended in the common framework of sleep, equal in their unconsciousness, breathing the same desert air, traveling toward the same western horizon at the same pace of 3 to 4 kilometers per hour when they are walking and 0 when they are not. Timur is awake. He is always awake longer than anyone else, processing the information of the day and constructing the plan for tomorrow, comparing the current state of the caravan, the animals, the cargo, the people, the condition of the equipment, against the demands of the route ahead. He sits in the courtyard in the cold dark and thinks, and his thinking has the specific quality of thought that is entirely practical and entirely present, uncontaminated by the retrospective or the speculative, focused on the real variables in their real relationships. He is satisfied with the caravan's condition. The people are tired but not dangerously tired. The animals are in good condition, better than he expected given the mountain section. The cargo is intact, the sealed boxes of Yusuf's that he doesn't know the contents of still secure, the silk still in good condition, the musk still in its leather pouches. The equipment has been maintained. Fatima's repairs during the sandstorm were well done, better than he would have expected of the kitchen staff, and he has revised his assessment of her accordingly. The route ahead, based on the information gathered in Merv, is manageable. He plans the next section of the journey, which will take them through Persia to the city of Nishapur, and then north and west toward Tabriz, running parallel to the mountains and through the drier country of the Iranian plateau, a section of the route that he knows well and that has, in his experience, a specific character, long flat distances and thin water and temperatures that will drop significantly as autumn deepens, requiring attention to the animal's cold weather management in ways that the mountain section, paradoxically, did not. He finishes his planning. He looks at the stars for a moment. Then he lies down and goes to sleep in the 4 minutes that he always takes to go to sleep, which is one of the gifts of a body that has been worked hard and a mind that does not carry what it cannot use. The caravan rests. The road waits. In the morning, it will begin again. Let me tell you about the long middle of the journey. The long middle is the part that the histories skip, the part that the traveler's accounts condense into phrases like, "We traveled many days through the desert," or "After much difficulty, we reached the next city." It is the part where nothing happens in the narrative sense, no dramatic event, no turning point, no arrival, and where everything happens in the experiential sense, because the long middle is where the journey actually takes place, where the distance is actually crossed, where the person who set out from Samarkand is gradually and irrevocably replaced by the person who will arrive in Tabriz. The long middle is the education. Dawud is in the middle of his education now. He has been on the road for 11 weeks. He has walked approximately 1,500 kilometers. He has slept in caravanserais and open camps, and once memorably, in a cave that Timur selected as shelter against a night that threatened weather, and that turned out to be occupied by a family of small, indignant birds whose opinion of the caravan's intrusion was clear and extensively expressed. He has eaten Fatima's cooking every evening and has developed opinions about it that he would not have expected to develop about food. A specific appreciation for the way she balances the constraint of limited ingredients against the need to feed 42 people something that sustains them not just physically, but in some harder-to-name way, the way that good food at the end of a hard day is a form of care that has effects beyond nutrition. He has also developed opinions about the road that he didn't have in Samarkand. He understands now what the road is. It is not the route, though the route is real and specific and consequential. It is not the trade, though the trade is the reason for everything. It is not even the distances, though the distances are the fact that everything else is organized around. The road is a relationship between people and the space they have to cross, and the character of that relationship is determined by the specific nature of the space, its demands, its gifts, its indifference. The desert does not care about the caravan. The mountain pass does not care about the schedules of the merchants. The sandstorm does not distinguish between the valuable cargo and the worthless, between the experienced traveler and the novice. The road makes this indifference clear in a way that no other environment does, with a consistency and a thoroughness that changes the people who encounter it. What it changes them into is people who are less surprised by indifference, and less surprised by the gifts that accompany the indifference: the extraordinary sky, the clean water at the end of a dry day, the fire after the cold, the food that Fatima makes at the end of something hard that turns the hard thing into an evening, and the evening into something bearable, and the bearable into something almost good. The caravan crosses the Iranian plateau. The plateau is, in its autumn colors, a landscape of such sustained beauty that David finds it difficult to process, not because beauty is rare in his experience, but because this particular beauty is so comprehensive and so indifferent: the vast pale brown of the dry grass, the dark line of the mountains to the north, the sky that changes color through the day from pale gold at dawn through white blue at midday to the deep amber and purple of the early evening, and it does not offer itself. It simply is, the landscape doing what the landscape does, and the caravan passing through it the way a breath passes through a room, temporary and weightless, leaving no mark. He writes in his journal, "I have been trying to describe this landscape for 3 weeks, and I don't have the words. The words I have are the words for things I have seen before, and this is not like things I have seen before. I will need new words, or I will need to accept that there are experiences the words cannot reach, which seems like an important thing to learn." He crosses this out. He writes it again. He leaves it. The caravan passes through Nishapur, one of the great cities of the Persian world, which in this century is both glorious and carrying in its stones the memory of a destruction. The Mongol conquest of a century earlier was absolute here, the city leveled and its population massacred in the specific way that the Mongol Empire demonstrated its seriousness about resistance. The city that exists now is rebuilt, vital, populated by the descendants of the people who were not there when the Mongols came, or who survived by methods that the history books prefer not to specify. It has its markets and its mosques and its scholars. Nishapur was the city of Omar Khayyam, the mathematician and poet, though he has been dead for 150 years by this point, and it receives the caravan with the practiced hospitality of a city that has always been on the road and knows what travelers need. Yusuf sells a portion of his cargo here, not the silk or the musk, those are for Tabriz and beyond, but some of the secondary goods he has been carrying, items purchased in Samarkand that have a market in Nishapur that they don't have in the West. He negotiates, sells, receives payment in silver coins that he adds to the accounts with the careful notation of a man who keeps his records updated at every opportunity, because the road is full of opportunities for the records to become confused, and confused records are a form of loss. He also collects debts. The web of credit and debt that underlies Silk Road commerce is one of the most sophisticated financial systems in the medieval world. Letters of credit issued in Samarkand can be honored in Tabriz or Nishapur by merchants who have never met the issuer, operating on a system of trust and verification that runs through the networks of merchant families and their representatives across the entire route. Yusuf has letters to collect on here, debts owed to him from a previous journey, and the collection of them is a social process as much as a financial one. The negotiation, the verification, the conversation that builds and maintains the relationship that the next transaction will depend on. He does this with the ease of long practice. Chen, meanwhile, has made his own arrangements in Nishapur, selling a portion of his lacquerware to a merchant he knows here and adding to his stock of Persian medicines, rosewater and various herbal preparations that are sought after in the Chinese market, and that he has been collecting at each waypoint, building a small but valuable secondary cargo from the materials available along the route. He does this with such quiet efficiency that most of the caravan barely notices it, which is precisely how Chen prefers to operate. Fatima in Nishapur replenishes the kitchen stores. She moves through the Nishapur market with the specific focus of a professional purchasing specialist, which is what she effectively is, evaluating quality and price with an efficiency that the vendors recognize and respond to with the particular respect that expertise commands in a market. She buys what she needs, pays what is fair, declines what is not, and returns to the caravanserai with her purchases organized and the accounting done in her head before she has reached the gate. That evening in the caravanserai, she makes the best meal of the journey. She does this at Nishapur because Nishapur has the ingredients: fresh vegetables, good lamb, saffron and dried rose petals for the rice dish that she has been planning since Merv, when she first knew what would be available here. She uses the caravanserai's proper kitchen, with its stone hearth and its good iron pots, rather than the campfire setup that she has been managing for weeks. She cooks for 2 hours in the warm kitchen, and the smell moves through the caravanserai and draws the other travelers in the building, not just the caravan's own people, to the area near the kitchen with the specific magnetism of good food being prepared. The meal is served in the large central room. 42 people from a dozen backgrounds eat together, the rice dish first, fragrant with saffron and rose and the sweetness of the dried fruit, then the lamb, tender from the slow fire, then the flat bread that she has made 3 batches of because she has the oven and the time and she knows how it will be received. There is tea, proper tea, not the road version. At the end of the meal, the Armenian merchant from the other caravan, they have been sharing the caravanserai, says something in Persian that David translates for the caravan's Arabic speakers. He says the cook deserves to be in a palace. Fatima, who is cleaning the kitchen and can hear this through the doorway, says nothing. She cleans the kitchen. In the morning, she packs it all back up and loads it on. Oh, the mule. The road continues west. The weeks that follow are the Iranian plateau, and then the climbing into the mountains of Azerbaijan, and the descent toward Tabriz, which is the western terminus of this leg of the journey, the place where Yusuf will sell his cargo and collect his debts and refill his stores and rest his animals for the longer journey that will follow if he decides to continue west, or the end of the journey if he decides to sell here and return east. He has not yet decided. He will decide in Tabriz, based on the market conditions when he arrives and the information he will gather there. This is how the Silk Road operates, not from a fixed plan executed against circumstances, but from a continuous adjustment of plan to circumstance, the merchant's intelligence being the ability to read the circumstances correctly and adjust the plan accordingly. On the road into Azerbaijan, the caravan passes through a landscape that changes again, greener than the plateau, the mountains rising and closing in on the route, the air heavier with moisture after the dry weeks on the plateau, the trees beginning to show autumn color, the particular gold and red of deciduous trees in the mountain autumn that is one of the most immediately beautiful things on the road. David walks through it thinking about his arrival. He will be in Tabriz within the week. His uncle will expect a report, a full commercial account of the journey, what was seen and heard and bought and sold and learned, the standard deliverable of a first long journey. He has the notes, the journal of commercial observations, the prices and the contacts and the conditions. He has what was asked of him. He also has the other journal, the one about the sky and the road and Chen's theory about conversation, and the sandstorm and Fatima's competence and the Buddhist monk, whose name he cannot spell, and the specific quality of the light on the Iranian plateau that he couldn't find words for, and the feeling of water after a long dry stretch in Timur's face when he looked at the empty spring and made the calculation. He doesn't know what to do with the other journal. It is not a commercial document. It is something he made for himself on the road, and that feels important in a way he cannot fully articulate, the record of a person who went somewhere and was changed by it and tried to keep track of how. He will not throw it away. He walks into the mountains of Azerbaijan, thinking about what he will do with the rest of his life. This is the road's final gift to most people who travel it, the disruption of the prior answer to that question. You set out from Samarkand or Tabriz, or wherever you set out from, with a plan that was built inside the world you knew, and the road takes you outside the world you knew for long enough that the plan no longer fits when you return. Not because the plan was wrong exactly. Because you are different, and the fit between a plan and the person it was made for requires that the person stay the same, and the road has made you someone the original plan was not made for. David will be a merchant. He is sure of this, he is good at it, he likes it. The road has not changed his assessment of his own aptitude. But the merchant he will be after this journey is different from the merchant he planned to be in Samarkand, different in ways that he will spend years understanding. He will be a merchant who knows what the road actually is, which is different from knowing what it is supposed to be. He will be a merchant who has stood in the dark of a sandstorm repairing leather straps by feel and eaten rice cooked with saffron in a caravanserai in Nishapur, and talked about consciousness with a monk whose name he can't spell. He will be a merchant who has crossed the Pamirs and drunk from the rivers of Khorasan and walked through the autumn color of the mountains of Azerbaijan, and who carries all of this in the body in the specific way that physical experience is carried. Not as a memory exactly, but as a fact about who he is, as present as the shape of his hands or the sound of his voice. He will be different. He is already different. Tabriz appears below them on the afternoon of the 79th day. It appears first as a smudge of smoke on the horizon, then as a mass of rooftops and minarets in the wide plain at the junction of several river valleys, then as a city, dense and alive, the third or fourth largest city in the world in this century, the capital of a Mongol successor state, and one of the great commercial centers of the Western Silk Road, where the goods from the east are transferred to the merchants of the west, who will carry them to Venice and Genoa and Bruges, and the ports of the Mediterranean. The caravan descends. The pace increases slightly, as paces always increase when the destination comes into sight, an involuntary acceleration of the body toward the end of an effort that the body has been ing for a long time. Even the camels move with something that might, generously, be interpreted as eagerness, though more likely it is simply that the road is descending and gravity is assisting. Yusuf rides at the front. He is on his horse for the first time in weeks, the horse that has been kept for the specific occasion of arrival, not because it is faster than walking, but because arriving on horseback is a different statement than arriving on foot, and in Tabriz, which is a city where appearances and relationships and the reading of status are part of the commercial intelligence, the statement matters. He looks at the city as they descend. He has been here many times. He knows it well. He knows its markets and its politics and its caravanserais and its people, the merchants and the officials and the gatekeepers who make the difference between a smooth entry and a complicated one. And he has done the work over 20 years of building the relationships that make entry smooth. He feels, riding down toward Tabriz, something that he knows from previous arrivals and that he finds impossible to fully analyze. A compound emotion that contains the satisfaction of completion and the strange diminishment of completion. The way the end of a long effort contains both the relief of finishing and the loss of the thing that made the effort worth making. The road. He will miss the road. He always misses the road. This is one of the things about the Silk Road that the commercial accounts do not record. The way it gets into you, the way the long walking and the night camps and the stars and the water sources and the conversations become a place you are partly from, a home that exists in motion rather than location, that you can only return to by leaving wherever you are. He will rest in Tabriz. He will sell his cargo and settle his accounts and write his letters and eat real food in a real house and sleep in a real bed. He will do all of this with genuine pleasure. And then, in a few months, he will begin preparing for the next journey, the next crossing, the next accumulation of distance and difficulty, and the specific gifts that the difficulty brings. He always does. Behind him, strung out along the descending road, the caravan follows. Timur walks at the back, as he always walks at the back on the approach to a city, watching the tail of the caravan for the problems that tend to appear when the destination is close. The tendency of the most tired animals to slow, the tendency of the most tired people to stop paying attention, the specific vulnerabilities of the last stretch that experienced caravan leaders know and inexperienced ones discover the hard way. He sees no problems. He walks into Tabriz at the back of the caravan, as he will walk out of it tomorrow or the day after on the return journey east, because this is his life, the walking, the managing, the attention, and he has no interest in any version of it that does not involve the road. He walks into the city gate. Fatima walks in the middle of the caravan, as she has always walked, managing the kitchen mule and thinking about what she will cook tonight. She has been planning it for 2 days. The specific meal she makes at the end of a long journey. The meal that is a celebration but that does not advertise itself as a celebration. That simply uses the best ingredients available in a city that has them and produces the meal that the journey has been working toward. She will need lamb. She will need good bread flour. The flat bread is adequate, but she has been thinking for weeks about risen bread, leavened bread, the bread that needs a proper oven and the time to rise, which the road doesn't allow. She will need vegetables. She will need the spices that she has been conserving for this moment, the small reserves she keeps back from the daily cooking for the final meal. She walks through the gate of Tabriz making her list. The market will have everything she needs. She will find it. Chen walks through the gate looking at the city with the specific attention of a man who has arrived here 6 times before and is noting what has changed and what has stayed the same, reading Tabriz the way the road has taught him to read everything. For the current state of things, the actual present facts, not the memory of the last visit superimposed on the present like a transparency. He sees several things he expected and 2 he didn't. He files them both. David walks through the gate of Tabriz on the 79th day of his first crossing of the Silk Road. He walks through the gate and into the noise and the smell of the city smell that he has not smelled for 11 weeks, which hits him with the specific force of the familiar encountered after absence, and he stops for a moment just inside the gate. He looks at the city around him. He is back. He has crossed the road, half of it, the eastern half, from Samarkand to Tabriz. And he has arrived in a city he has been to many times before, and that feels, today, completely different from all those times before. He stands in the gate for a moment longer than he needs to. Then he walks on. Let me step back now from the road and from the specific people on it and from the dust and the stars and the water sources and the smell of Fatima's cooking. And let me say something about what the Silk Road was and what it meant and what it means now, in the context of the very long view of human history that these nights at Dull Tales are always, in some sense, attempting. The Silk Road existed for approximately 1,500 years in its various forms, from the Han Dynasty period in China in the 2nd century BC to the disruption of the overland route by the Ottoman expansion and the opening of maritime alternatives in the 15th and 16th centuries AD. In those 1,500 years, it moved not only silk and spices and precious stones and the other goods that funded the empires of the ancient and medieval world, but the following: paper and the printing technology that paper enabled, gunpowder and the weapons it eventually produced, the magnetic compass, Buddhism, which traveled the road from India into China and then into the rest of East Asia, Islam, which spread along the road's western sections with a thoroughness that reshaped the religious map of Central Asia, the plague, which traveled the road in both directions and arrived in Europe via the Crimean ports in 1347, and the conversations that happened in the caravanserais, between the merchants and the pilgrims and the diplomats, and the scholars who traveled the same road for different purposes. The conversations that moved ideas between the Greek tradition and the Islamic world, and the Chinese tradition, and the Indian tradition. The long cross-cultural dialogue that produced, in the cities along the route, Samarkand and Nishapur and Merv and Bukhara, and a dozen others, intellectual cultures of remarkable sophistication and originality. The road was a machine for conversation. Chen said this, sitting by the fire in the Pamir caravanserai, in the way that people on the road sometimes say the essential thing without knowing they are saying it. The conversation is the thing. The goods are the pretext. This is not entirely true. The goods were genuinely important. The commercial system of the Silk Road was genuinely complex and genuinely consequential, and the merchants who traveled it were not on some cultural mission. They were trying to make money. But it is true in the sense that matters for the longest view, which is that the silk has rotted and the spices have been consumed, and the silver coins are in museums, and what remains is the accumulated effect of 1,500 years of people from different worlds sitting beside fires in the evenings and attempting to tell each other what their worlds are like. This accumulated effect is part of what we are. The civilization you live in, the specific combination of philosophical traditions and technological capabilities and cultural practices that constitutes the world you were born into, is partly a product of the conversations that happened on that road. Not entirely, not simply, not in a way that yields a clean, direct line between any specific conversation and any specific current reality, but as a background condition, a form of cross-pollination that enriched every tradition it touched by exposing it to every other tradition it encountered. The road made the world larger in the sense that matters, not geographically larger, but imaginatively larger, epistemologically larger, more aware of its own contingency, more capable of seeing that the way things are done in one place is one way rather than the only way. This is one of the road's most important exports, and it traveled in both directions and in all directions, and never showed up in any inventory of goods. It is still traveling. It is here now in this conversation. The conversation that is this particular night, in this particular room, between your attention and this account of people who walked through the mountains and deserts of Central Asia 700 years ago, and looked at the stars from places that have been in darkness since then, but that were, on the night we've been describing, briefly illuminated by the fires of a caravan. That illumination hasn't gone out. It's just changed form. Now let me bring you back to the caravan, to the last night on the road before Tabriz, which I want to give you in full because it is the kind of moment that the road produces and that the accounts rarely capture. The moment just before the end of something long when the thing that is about to end becomes briefly, completely visible. The caravan camps in a valley, a day's walk from Tabriz. Timur selected this spot not just for its practical virtues, good flat ground, a stream shelter from the wind, but because he has camped here before on the last night of previous journeys, and he knows what it looks like at dusk, which is one of the things about repeat travel on the same route. The specific aesthetic pleasures of the familiar, the recognition of beauty that the first journey produced as surprise and subsequent journeys produce as anticipation. The valley in the evening light is beautiful in the specific way of mountain valley evenings. The light going gold, and then amber and then red. The shadow of the mountains coming down the far slopes while the near slopes are still lit. The stream catching the last light and throwing it back as silver, the smell of the earth cooling after a clear autumn day. Fatima makes a simple meal. The provisions are low after 79 days. The restocking will happen in Tabriz tomorrow, and she works with what she has with the same care she brought to the meal in Nishapur, because the simplicity of the ingredients is not a reason for the care to diminish. They eat. The fire burns. Around it, the 42 people of the caravan are in various states of the particular tiredness of the last day of a long journey, a tiredness that is different from the tiredness of the middle of the journey, less heavy, lighter in a way that is produced by the knowledge of the end, the way the body begins releasing the sustained effort before it is quite finished, already starting the transition toward the rest that is coming. David sits by the fire. He has his journal in his hands, but he is not writing in it. He is looking at the fire, and at the people around it, and at the dark valley beyond the firelight and the stars above it. He is trying to memorize this, not with the deliberateness of someone making an effort to memorize, which is counterproductive, but with the specific quality of attention that he has been developing on the road, the attention that is simply fully present and therefore records the present the way it actually is rather than the way memory will reconstruct it later. He is looking at the fire and the faces and the dark, and he is here, fully here, in a way that he hopes he will be able to remember not as a picture, but as a feeling. Yusuf is asleep already, the early and efficient sleep of the experienced traveler. Chen is awake, looking at the stars with the expression of a man who is looking at something he has been looking at for 60 years and still finds worth looking at. Timur is doing his perimeter check. Fatima is cleaning the last of the kitchen equipment, working by the firelight with the careful attention she brings to everything, the cleaning as purposeful as the cooking. The camels breathe in the dark. The stream runs. The stars are what they have been every night on this journey, the same stars, the stars of the Silk Road, the stars that were there when the first merchants walked this route 2,000 years ago, and that will be there when the last merchants walk it several centuries from now, and that are, tonight, above a caravan on the last night of its journey from Samarkand to Tabriz, shining on 42 people, and their animals at the end of 79 days of walking. David puts the journal down. He looks at the sky. He has been looking at this sky for 11 weeks, and he has never gotten used to it, which is the thing about certain kinds of beauty. It resists habituation. It remains surprising regardless of repetition. It offers itself again each time as if for the first time. He has looked at this sky from mountain passes and desert floors and river banks and the courtyards of caravanserais in this valley, and every time it has been the same sky and a different sky, the same stars in different relationship to the horizon, the same darkness with a different quality of cold. He is not a philosophical man, not yet, 23 years old, a merchant's son on his first long journey, carrying 2 journals of which one is commercial and one is something else. But he has been thinking philosophical thoughts for 11 weeks, the road having created the conditions for philosophical thinking, by removing all the distractions that normally prevent it, and the thinking has produced something that he is not ready to write down, but that is present in him, the way a new understanding is present before it has been articulated. The understanding is something like this. The distance between here and Samarkand is not only geographic, it is also temporal, in the sense that the person who left Samarkand 11 weeks ago and the person sitting here at this fire are not identical, and the journey is the difference between them. The road is a machine not only for moving goods and conversations, but for making people different from who they were before they walked it. And the people who do this work, who move across the world's distances for a living, are doing something that goes beyond the commercial, even if the commercial is the frame within which they understand what they are doing. He does not write this down. He looks at the stars. The fire burns lower. The night deepens. Around the fire, people find their sleeping places one by one. The Armenian merchants who have been camping near the caravan for the past week, the guards on the last watch of the journey, the drivers curled near their animals. David stays awake longer than most, looking at the valley and the sky and the fire. Then he lies down. He is asleep before the fire goes out. In the morning, the caravan descends to Tabriz. That is one way to end this story. The arrival, the commercial completion, the dispersal of the caravan into the city's life, the cargo sold and the animals rested, and the people going their various ways, carrying the journey with them in the specific form that long journeys take when they are over, which is not nostalgia exactly and not grief, but something in between. The bittersweet weight of a thing that was real and is now finished and therefore has become part of who you are rather than what you are doing. But there is another way to end it. Consider the road. Not the caravan, not the people, not the specific journey of this specific autumn in the 14th century. The road itself. The road exists before any of these people and after all of them. It is worn into the earth by centuries of passing, a groove in the landscape that becomes, over time, more itself the more it is used, the stone worn smooth by the feet of the people who walked it, the rock faces marked by the wheels of the carts and the hooves of the animals, the landscape itself shaped by the sustained human intention of moving through it. The road runs from China to the Mediterranean, from the silk workshops to the perfume makers, from the places where things are made to the places where they are wanted, across the mountains and the deserts and the river crossings and the mountain passes, through the oasis cities and the high plateaus and the river valleys, under the same sky that is above you now, in the same night that is around you now. It is empty tonight, the road. The caravans have moved on. The 14th century is long over. The overland route that was the Silk Road was already diminishing in the 15th century, as the maritime alternatives opened and the political conditions on the land route deteriorated. And by the 16th century, the great age of the overland trade is essentially over, the goods moving by ship now, the road not abandoned but reduced, a local route where it was once an international one. But the road is still there. Some of it, under different surfaces, under different names, the groove worn into the earth by centuries of traffic, persisting in the landscape in the specific way that human intentions persist when they are repeated often enough and long enough to become part of the physical world. And the conversations are still traveling. Slower than light, slower than any network, but traveling, the ideas that moved from China to Greece and from Greece to the Islamic world and from the Islamic world to Europe, the traditions that enriched each other through the long centuries of contact, the cross-pollinations that produced the specific intellectual and artistic and spiritual world you were born into, still moving, still being absorbed, still producing effects that nobody planned and nobody could have planned. You are, in some small and diffuse and completely unverifiable way, partly the result of the conversations that happened in the caravanserais of the Silk Road. That young merchant sitting by the fire on the last night of his journey, looking at the stars, thinking the thoughts that he couldn't quite write down, those thoughts are still somewhere. They didn't disappear when he died, when his journal rotted, when the fire went out. They went into him and then into whatever he built and made and said and taught and who he became, and from him into the next generation and the next, diffusing and transforming and becoming unrecognizable as themselves, but still present as a direction, a tendency, a slight inclination of the culture toward the things that the road taught. The things the road taught. That the world is larger than any one view of it, that the people on the other side of the mountain organize reality differently and are not wrong. That presence, full, embodied, sensory presence in the specific place and moment you are actually in, is one of the goods of existence that no cargo can carry and no accounting can capture. That food at the end of a hard day is a form of love. That the stars look the same from every point on the earth, and that this is either a fact about the stars or a fact about us, and probably both. That the conversation is the thing. You are in a conversation right now. This one, this long, slow walk through the past, this particular night's worth of distance and company, the road. That this conversation travels is not geographic. It runs from the past to the present, from the people who walked that road in the 14th century to whoever is lying in the dark right now, at the end of a day that had its own distances and its own difficulties, listening to the account of people who walked a different kind of distance and found in it something worth passing on. The passing on is the road. You are on it now. Rest here for a while. The road will be there in the morning. It always is. Tonight you have walked from Samarkand to the edge of Tabriz. 79 days in the company of a merchant and a caravan leader, and a young man learning to see, and a cook who understood something about care that most people take their whole lives to understand. You have crossed the Pamirs and the Iranian plateau and slept under more stars than most modern people will ever see in a lifetime, and listened to the conversation that Chen said was the point of everything. You have been on the road. The road is in you now, the way it gets into everyone who travels it, as a knowledge of distance, a feel for the long middle, a patient relationship with the horizon that never quite arrives. Sleep. The stars are the same stars. The morning will bring whatever it brings, as it has always brought whatever it brought, to every traveler who ever lay down on this road and let the night do its work. Thank you for being here at Dull Tales tonight. If the slow pace and the long distances are your kind of thing, please subscribe. It helps more people find their way to this channel. Hit like, leave a comment telling me where you listened from, tell me which part of the road stayed with you. Every comment is a person. I read them all. Next time, we go north and cold, into a winter that smells of smoke and animals, and the specific trapped warmth of 40 people trying not to kill each other before spring. The Viking Longhouse, that's next time. But for now, good night. The road goes on.